Hello students, welcome back. I just want to say congratulations, you have successfully built Glowfield. You took our terrible broken game in lesson 1 and brought it all the way to our awesome finished product here through 8 lessons. At this point you might be saying, well, what's next? What do I do from here? So in this video I want to give you some ideas that you might be able to use to expand Glowfield into a game that truly feels all your own. So let's head to the computer screen and we'll dive right in. So here is our final version of Glowfield, completely playable with movement of our player, shrinking light zones as our mechanic, orbs that we can pick up, burning enemies that track the player that we can now damage. We have, explosion of particles. We have hit overlays when we take damage and darkness overlays when we move into the darkness, and eventually we die. So what can we do to make this game more our own? Well, the first thing that I'll say is we could add different enemy types. Right now we just have one enemy that tracks the player at a given speed. You could make faster enemies that zoom across the battlefield. You could make enemies that are tanks that are bigger and have more health. Or, I think this would be really interesting, you could create an enemy that will avoid the light rather than charging right in it. So once it gets to the edge of a light zone, it just stays on the edge waiting for you to have to escape and then following you. This is a natural extension to our game because we already have our arrays for enemies, spawning for enemies, movement for enemies, health, and light interactions that are already in place. Another thing that we could implement is some type of score multiplier or survival score system. Right now, we're just tracking how long the player is alive, but we could reward points for every second that they survive. We could reward points for every pickup that they get. We could reward points for every enemy that they kill. And we could even have a multiplier that says, hey, let's give extra points as long as the enemy or the player hasn't taken any damage. We could do this because we're already tracking our runtime seconds. We've got the logic in place to defeat enemies and the logic in place to spawn pickups. It might be a natural extension to just create a score variable that we adjust when all of those things happen. Another thing that might be really cool to add to our system is another pickup. So instead of just having our orb systems, what if we spawned health pickups that appeared throughout the battlefield? Maybe every time an enemy died, we created a health pickup that we could go, and when we interact with it, it automatically fills a portion of our HP. I think this is feasible because we already know how to do collectible objects. We generate the data, we spawn the data, and we update the data, and we know how to do our collision checks. So a health pickup, or maybe a pickup that slows the shrinking of all of the lights on our battlefield, might be pretty easy to implement for us. What about adding another hazard to the game? So right now we know our light zones shrink, and when we enter darkness we take damage. But imagine if we had pockets of darkness that moved throughout the battlefield. And so if we were sitting here in a safe light zone, maybe a pocket of darkness could enter and overtake some of our light zones. This works really well because we already have a pretty good positioning loop built around light, darkness, and movement. So imagine creating like a cloud object, and that cloud object just moves back and forth through the battlefield, bringing darkness wherever it goes. And the last thing that I'll say you might want to add is some type of knockback system for when the enemy gets hit. Right now we just have a cooldown, and we rely on the player to move themselves out of harm's way. But we might be able to create a system so that when you collide with an enemy, you're knocked back. You're given some velocity that sends you in the opposite direction of the enemy. This would make our combat feel more dynamic and more visually responsive. And I think this feature could work really well because our game already tracks enemy movement, damage, and our direction vectors that we would need to use in order to implement our knockback system. So those are just some ideas that you could implement in our game with your final version of your code. And I think in doing so, you would take Glowfield and really make it your own, because that's what I want you to feel. I want you to feel like you have ownership of this game, that you are not only playing the game, but you built the game. And if you enjoyed that whole process, that process of taking something broken and bringing it all the way to the end and having ownership of it, I congratulate you, and I hope to see you in another video.